The glass atrium of the Thorn Plaza didn't just go quiet, it went sterile. It was the kind of silence that precedes a controlled demolition. I was standing directly beneath the company logo, a sleek, silver predatory bird, when Marcus Thorn folded his notes. He didn't look at me. He looked past me, as if I had already become part of the architecture. There was no preamble, no private office warning, just a clean surgical strike delivered in front of every department head and analyst I had mentored for 2 decades, on the massive LED screen behind him. The quarterly summary glared in high definition. A $50 million deficit was rendered in a shade of red that looked uncomfortably like blood. Below the number, in neat corporate font, was my name, Marianne Crowley, VP of Operations. The implication didn't just land, it cratered. I felt the air displacement before I heard the footsteps. HR moved in on my left. A silent shadow. Security tightened the perimeter on my right. They weren't there to protect the building. They were there to escort a ghost. Marcus finally met my eyes. He didn't raise his voice. Marcus Thorn was a man who used silence as a whetstone. He smiled. The same practiced predatory curve of the lips he used for hostile takeovers. "Marianne, your legacy here is settled," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the atrium. "In fact, I think I'll hang your portrait in this very hallway. A permanent reminder to the firm of what happens when we let sentimentality mask incompetence. The humiliation was a physical weight. I felt the collective gaze of 200 people turn into a wall of glass. I was 46 years old. I had given this company my youth, my marriage, and my eyesight. In 60 seconds, they had reduced it all to a cautionary tale. I didn't beg. I didn't defend the numbers I knew he had doctored. To speak would be to give him the satisfaction of a struggle. Instead, I nodded a single, sharp tilt of the chin and turned toward the exit. The badge reader didn't even try to process my ID. It flashed a defiant, jagged red, access denied. That's when the haptic buzz of my phone vibrated against my thigh. It wasn't a notification. It was a warning. I pulled the device from my pocket as the security guard tapped his own master key to let me out of my own building. An unknown number, 1 line of text, urgent. A civil arrest warrant for evidence tampering was signed 10 minutes ago. CPD is being dispatched to your home address. Do not go back. The heavy glass doors swung open. The humid Chicago heat hit me like a blow to the chest, a violent contrast to the air-conditioned tomb I had just left. Behind me, I heard the muffled sound of a PowerPoint transition. Someone laughed at a joke Marcus made. The machinery of the Thorn Group didn't even stutter. I stood on the sidewalk of Michigan Avenue, the sun glinting off the black SUV parked illegally at the curb. Losing my career was the distraction. The warrant was the execution. If they were moving this fast to erase me, it wasn't because I had failed. It was because I was the only one left who knew how the engine actually worked, and I still had the keys in my pocket. The badge reader didn't just reject me, it mocked me. That jagged red blink was the heartbeat of a system that had already forgotten my name. The security guard, a man whose wedding I had contributed to 3 years ago, wouldn't meet my eyes. His hand hovered over his radio, a silent threat. I was no longer a vice president. I was a breach in the perimeter. Before I even reached the elevator, my phone shuddered in my palm. Email access terminated, cloud credentials revoked, remote wipe initiated. The screen flickered, then died. When it flickered back to life, it was a blank, glowing slab of glass. 20 years of architecture, strategy, and late-night breakthroughs had been reduced to a factory reset in the time it took me to exhale. In the parking garage, the silence was heavy. I tossed the company laptop into the trunk. It was dead weight now. A gray plastic tombstone for a career that had ended 10 minutes ago. The drive home was a blur of Chicago gray. I kept my hands at 10 and 2, my breathing shallow, watching the rearview mirror. When I turned onto my street, the air in the car turned cold. A black SUV sat idling across from my driveway. No plates, dark tint. The engine emitted a low, predatory hum that vibrated in my teeth. A new notification bypassed my Do Not Disturb setting. A ghost message. Bring back what you took. Marianne, before the warrant finds you. No name. No return number. I looked at my house, the one paid for by Thorn Group bonuses. It looked like a trap. The porch light was off. The windows dark. If I stepped inside, I was giving them a stationary target. The SUV's headlights flicked to high beams for a split second. A predatory wink. They weren't there to arrest me yet. They were waiting for me to lead them to the one thing they feared I still had. I didn't turn into the driveway. I shifted into drive and felt the weight of the city pressing in. They hadn't just erased my job, they were trying to erase my exit. I didn't use the front door. I slipped through the garage, moving by muscle memory in the dark. Behind a stack of old paint cans, I peeled the duct tape from the back of a shelf. The hard drive felt cold. A jagged piece of my past I'd tried to bury. I opened my personal laptop, one Marcus's IT goons had never touched. The drive spun up with a low, vintage whine. The folder was labeled Project Athena. 10 years ago, the board had called it over-engineered and obsessive. They'd officially killed the project, or so they told me. But as I scrolled through the encrypted audit trails, the truth hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't killed Athena. They had cannibalized her. My code, the core kernel I'd written in this very garage, was now the nervous system of Thorn Group's entire logistics empire. It handled every shipment, every contract, every dollar. And then I saw the line of code that made my blood turn to ice license _ status conditional. Valid only during author _ employment, the moment Marcus fired me. He hadn't just cleared his staff. He had accidentally revoked the operating license for his entire company. By law, the Thorn Group was now running on stolen property. A chat window snapped open on my screen. No username, just a blinking cursor. You finally looked at the foundation. Marianne. My heart hammered. I typed back, "Who is this?" "A friend who likes to watch empires fall." Marcus assumed you were too loyal to ever check the fine print. He was wrong. My phone buzzed on the workbench, vibrating against the wood. A location pin, 1 mile away. No message. I slammed the laptop shut. I wasn't just a fired executive anymore. I was a ticking time bomb inside their mainframe. They weren't hunting me to recover data. They were hunting me to force a signature before the system realized its heart had stopped beating. I had 30 minutes before the warrant went live. It was time to stop hiding and start negotiating. The legal folder hit the desk with a thud that echoed like a closing cell door. My lawyer, Elias, didn't look up. He traced the ink with a silver pen, his face a mask of professional dread. "This signature is a masterpiece," he whispered. "The slant, the pressure, it's almost you." Almost. I leaned in. The IP transfer appendix looked perfect, except for one microscopic flaw. The date, I realized. My voice cold? I was in London that day. 12 people can testify to it. "It's not just the date, Marianne." Elias tapped a specific clause. "This document only transfers derivative works. It doesn't touch your core kernel." He left a hole in the contract on purpose. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't been sloppy. He'd been baiting a trap. He didn't want my silence, I said, the pieces clicking into place. He wanted me to find this. He wanted me to come to him, terrified, and offer to fix the contract in exchange for making the embezzlement charges disappear. "He's offering you a trade," Elias warned. "Your soul for your freedom. If you sign a clean version now, you're complicit in his fraud. If you don't, he triggers the arrest warrant." My phone buzzed a jagged vibration against the mahogany desk. "The clock is ticking. Marianne, stop digging before you find something you can't survive." I stared at my forged name. Marcus thought he knew my breaking point. He thought 20 years of corporate conditioning had turned me into a coward who would choose safety over the truth. "He thinks I'm negotiating," I said, standing up. My chair screeched against the floor, a war cry in a room full of whispers. "He's wrong. I'm not looking for a deal. I'm looking for a detonator." Elias looked at me, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. "Then you'd better move, because he isn't playing for your job anymore. He's playing for your life. Outside, the same black SUV was waiting at the corner. The hunt had evolved. The headline hit my screen before I could even hail a cab. VP Crowley under investigation for data theft. There were no facts. Just a pixelated photo of me and a series of anonymous sources. Within minutes, the system Marcus built began to swallow me whole. My banking app froze under review. My credit cards declined fraud alert. He wasn't just firing me, he was deleting my ability to exist in a capitalist society. I dropped my compromised phone into a trash can and bought a burner in a crowded pharmacy. Every person I passed felt like a witness. Every siren felt like it was for me. I checked into a motel that smelled of bleach and desperation. The moment the burner phone caught a signal, a text from my old protege appeared. Marianne, the firm just issued a memo. Anyone caught talking to you is terminated immediately. They're saying you're dangerous. I typed back, do you believe them? The 3 dots of a reply pulsed, then vanished. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. The burner phone rang. No ID. A voice, smooth as silk and cold as a Chicago winter, filled my ear. This doesn't have to be your life. Marianne, the bank account, the reputation, it all comes back with one signature. Just return what you stole tonight. I didn't steal anything. I whispered, my voice echoing off the stained walls. I'm just taking back my property. Property is a legal fiction, the voice countered. Reality is what we say it is, and right now, you're a ghost. The line went dead. I didn't sleep. I watched the door handle, realizing that Marcus wasn't just hunting me, he was waiting for me to break from the isolation. But he forgot one thing. Ghosts are the only ones who can walk through walls. I packed my bag. If they wanted a ghost, I'd give them a haunting. The headquarters of Thorne's biggest rival felt like a fortress. I was escorted to the top floor by a woman who treated me like a biohazard. Behind the final glass door sat Elena Thorne Marcus's ex-wife and his only true intellectual equal. She didn't rise. She just watched me with eyes that had seen through Marcus long before I had. The martyr returns, she said, her voice a low, elegant rasp. I assumed you'd be in a cell by now. I'm not here for sanctuary. Elena, and I'm not here to sell my code. She tilted her head. Then you're wasting my time. I'm here to give you the kill shot, I said, leaning over her desk. I know he used the Athena kernel to launder the 50 million. I have the digital fingerprints. You want a hostile takeover? I'm the only one who can unlock the vault. The room went tomb quiet. Elena's facade didn't crack, but her pupils dilated. He thought divorce meant I'd stop auditing him, she whispered. Sliding a tablet toward me, it showed the same red columns from the Chapter 1 execution. But why help me? What's your price? I don't want money. I want my life back, I replied, and I want to watch his face when he realizes the woman he erased is the one who turned out the lights. She studied me for a long, agonizing second. Then she reached out and shook my hand. Her grip was like iron. A word of advice. Marianne, don't miss. My burner phone shuddered. I looked down. A photo of my own front door. Wide open. Someone was inside my house. The alliance was signed, but the war had just followed me home. I stood in the motel shadows, my fingers hovering over the keys like a conductor before a symphony of ruin. When the burner phone rang, I didn't wait for him to speak. The Athena kernel is heartbeat sensitive. Marcus, I said, my voice unnervingly calm, and I just gave it an arrhythmia. Turn it off, Marcus hissed. He sounded frantic. The polished CEO mask finally melting. This isn't leverage. Marianne, it's arson. On my screen, the map of North America began to pulse. I hadn't crashed the system. I'd simply introduced a 3-second lag into every transaction. In high-frequency logistics, 3 seconds is an eternity. It was a digital chokehold. Sabotage is messy. I replied, this is just repossession. You think you're winning? Marcus's voice dropped to a sinister crawl. Check your messages. I have 2 men outside your mother's house in Evanston. They aren't there to deliver flowers. My heart skipped. A cold spike of adrenaline hitting my gut. My finger trembled over the execute command. This was the moment he expected me to break. He thought family was my weakness. He forgot it was also my reason. Then you should tell them to run, I whispered. Because if I hit enter again, the Thorn Group's tax shelters in the Caymans will auto-report to the IRS. You'll be bankrupt before your men even reach her front door. Silence. I could hear his ragged breathing. The sound of a man realizing he was holding a knife while I was holding a detonator. Pull them back. Marcus. Or we both burn. 10 seconds passed. 20. Then, a grainy video clip arrived on my phone, a black sedan peeling away from my mother's curb. This isn't over. He spat, and the line went dead. I didn't celebrate. I hit the key. The lag deepened. I wasn't just squeezing his throat anymore. I was draining the blood from his veins. The Thorn Plaza press room was a sea of flashbulbs and predatory silence. Marcus stood at the podium, his tailored suit a fragile armor against the rumors of system failure. Our infrastructure is secure. He lied, his voice echoing through the atrium. The recent glitches are the work of a disgruntled former employee, a woman who has clearly lost her grip on reality. I stepped from behind the velvet curtain. The room gasped. I didn't look like a woman who had lost her grip. I looked like the one who had finally found the handle. If I'm a ghost, Marcus, I said, walking toward him as 100 cameras pivoted like sunflowers. Then let's talk about what haunts your servers. He reached for his security radio, but I was faster. I didn't play a digital file. I placed an old-fashioned analog cassette recorder on the podium. Magnetic tape doesn't leave metadata. It can't be hacked. And it certainly can't be erased by a remote wipe. I hit play. Marcus's voice, cold and clinical, filled the hall. We'll pin the 50 million deficit on Crowley. She's loyal enough to take the hit. And by the time she figures out the IP transfers were forged, she'll be in a jumpsuit. Frame her first. The truth won't matter once she's discredited. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face turned the color of ash. That's a deep fake. He barked, his eyes darting toward the exits. AI-generated propaganda. I held up a tablet showing the live forensic validation from Elena's firm. Actually, Marcus, this is the Athena kernel's own integrity check. It verified your vocal frequency in real time. You spent 10 years telling the board the system was infallible. Are you calling it a liar now? The room erupted. Reporters surged forward like a breaking wave. Marcus stepped back, hitting the screen behind him, the one still displaying the red columns of "My failure." I leaned in, my voice a whisper beneath the roar. You said you'd hang my photo in this hallway, Marcus, but I think they'll need the space for your indictment instead. He looked at his phone. The board had just issued a vote of no confidence. The empire hadn't just fallen, it had collapsed on top of him. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom finally swung open, exhaling a cold, metallic draft. The directors hurried out like rats from a sinking ship, avoiding my gaze as if my presence were contagious. Then came Marcus. He was stripped of his title, his access, and his arrogance. His expensive suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too big. He didn't walk, he drifted, escorted by 2 officers who treated him with the bored efficiency of a sanitation crew. We met at the exact center of the hallway, the spot where he had promised to hang my photo as a monument to failure. The officers stopped to verify a detail on the warrant. Marcus looked at the blank wall, then at me. His eyes were bloodshot, the pupils narrow with a desperate, lingering venom. You think this is justice? He whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment. You've burned the house down just to kill a spider. Marianne, there's nothing left for you here. I didn't burn it. Marcus, I replied, stepping into his personal space, close enough to see the sweat on his brow. I just stopped holding up the ceiling for you. One of the officers clicked a pair of steel cuffs around his wrists. The sound was soft, almost musical, the final punctuation mark on a 20-year sentence. As they led him away, a technician stepped forward with a drill. He wasn't hanging a portrait. He was mounting a seized by federal authorities placard directly onto the wood. The hallway hadn't become my graveyard. It had become his crime scene. My phone vibrated. A message from the chairman. The board is prepared to offer you the interim CEO position. Name your terms. Please turn the system back on. I looked at the message, then at the retreating back of the man who had tried to erase me. The building felt lighter, but it also felt hollow. I didn't head for the boardroom. I headed for the elevator. The boardroom was a vacuum. No phones, no assistants. Just the remaining directors looking at me like I was a life raft in a hurricane. Name your price. Marianne, the chairman said, sliding a contract across the polished mahogany. CEO, full autonomy, a compensation package that makes Marcus look like an intern. Just turn the system back on. Save the firm. I didn't even touch the folder. I looked at the faces around the table, the same faces that had watched me get executed in the atrium without blinking. You're mistaken, I said, my voice steady enough to cut glass. I didn't come here to negotiate my return. I came to deliver the death certificate. The room went cold. What does that mean? The Athena kernel wasn't just a piece of software, it was my intellectual property. And an hour ago, I signed an exclusive, irrevocable license to your biggest competitor. Elena Thorne's firm now owns the engine that runs this building. The chairman's face went gray. That's corporate suicide. No, I replied. Standing up and smoothing my jacket, it's a market correction. You spent 20 years treating loyalty like a commodity you could buy and sell. You forgot that some things, once broken, stay broken. I walked to the door. No one moved. No one spoke. The power in the room had shifted so completely that the air felt thin. I stepped out of the Thorne Plaza for the last time. I didn't look back at the glass tower. I pulled the burner phone from my pocket and hit format. Here's the truth they don't teach you in business school. If a system only values you when you become a threat to it. You were never an employee. You were a hostage. I'm no longer in the building. I'm the one who walked away while it was still standing. The LED on the badge reader didn't just turn red, it died. A flat, hollow click echoed in the silent corridor, signaling that my clearance 24 years of sweat and strategy had been revoked in a millisecond. Julian, the CEO's son, didn't look up from his iPad. At 28, he possessed the unearned confidence of a man who had never been told no. Effective immediately. Rowan, he said, his voice as sterile as a hospital ward. The board is prioritizing agility. Security will assist you with your exit. The conference room remained a tomb. I had mentored 3 of the executives at that table. I'd saved 2 of their marriages and all of their bonuses. Now, they stared at their legal pads as if the wood grain held the secrets of the universe. The escort was efficient. 2 guards, faces like stone. When we reached my office, the air left my lungs. My desk was a white desert. The framed photo of my husband at the Allegheny Overlook gone. The heirloom pen from my father gone. Even the coffee ring I'd left on the mahogany that morning had been buffed away. I reached for my corporate iPhone. The screen flickered. Then factory reset itself before my eyes. Hello. It whispered in 12 different languages. I was no longer Rowan Mercer. Senior VP. I was a ghost in a $2,000 suit. I tried to dial my husband's number, my thumb trembling. Service unavailable. They hadn't just cut my access. They had terminated the entire data plan. I was standing in the heart of Pittsburgh, surrounded by millions. Yet I had been digitally lobotomized as the elevator doors slid shut, stripping me of the 42nd floor. A final notification hissed on my personal watch, the only thing they couldn't wipe. An automated press release from the firm Rowan Mercer has stepped down due to unforeseen internal discrepancies. The word discrepancies felt like a bullet. They weren't just firing me. They were rewriting my history into a crime. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold industrial wind of the city biting at my face. They thought they had deleted me, but they forgot one thing: I built the architecture they were standing on. And I knew exactly where the trapdoors were. The locksmith didn't even look up. To him, I wasn't a homeowner. I was an eviction notice in a silk blouse. The whine of his drill bit deep into the mahogany door of my apartment, the corporate executive suite I'd called home for 6 years. I watched the brass deadbolt fall into his palm like a spent shell casing. "Unit's been reclaimed, ma'am," he muttered. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded like a man following a script. Reclaimed? The word tasted like ash. My contract guarantees 30 days notice for relocation. He didn't argue. He just handed me a digital clipboard. Orders came through an hour ago. Emergency asset recovery. I looked at the signature on the screen. It wasn't Julian's messy, entitled scrawl. It was a series of narrow, elegant loops I knew better than my own. Sarah, my protege, the woman I'd plucked from a stagnant pool of junior analysts and polished into a diamond. I had taught her how to negotiate, how to dress for a board meeting, and most importantly, how to spot a weakness before it became a liability. She had spotted mine. I trusted her. I reached for my phone. But the screen was still a taunting, hello. The company hadn't just taken my job. They had taken my shelter. Every benefit, every tether I had to this city was being severed with surgical precision. A black sedan idled at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the cold glow of the streetlights. It didn't move. It just watched. A chill that had nothing to do with the Pittsburgh wind crawled up my spine. This wasn't a firing. It was an extraction. I gripped the strap of my laptop bag, the only thing I had left that wasn't company property. Inside was the encrypted drive I'd kept for years. A just-in-case I never thought I'd need. The locksmith slammed the door shut, the new lock clicking with a finality that echoed down the empty hall. I was standing on the sidewalk of a city I'd helped build, and I was invisible. How long had she been sharpening the knife while I was teaching her how to hold it? I didn't wait for the sedan to move. I turned and walked into the shadows of an alleyway, my heels clicking a rhythm of war against the pavement. Sarah knew my moves, but she only knew the moves I'd taught her. She hadn't learned what I do when I'm backed into a corner. The memo reached me before I could find a place to breathe. It arrived via a burner email, a forwarded chain stripped of headers but dripping with malice, unauthorized transfers, shell company kickbacks, systematic embezzlement. My name sat at the top, bolded and cold, like a target painted on a chest. My personal phone vibrated. An unknown DC area code. I'm not looking for a quote. Rowan, said Marcus, a journalist I'd fed stories to for a decade. He sounded like he was at a funeral. They have the receipts. And they have the video. The file arrived a second later. I opened it with trembling fingers. It was a high-resolution still from a security feed in Zurich, a city I hadn't visited in 3 years. There I was, sliding a thick envelope to a known money launderer. The angle was perfect. The lighting hit the bridge of my nose just right. Even the Cartier on my wrist was correct. It was a masterpiece of digital assassination. That's a deep fake, I whispered. Our forensic guy says the metadata is clean. Marcus replied, Rowan, it's a trail. Tax returns, wire transfers, your signature is on everything. The DA is already looking. I stared at the image. The woman in the photo held her shoulders with a rigid, military posture. I haven't stood like that since my back surgery 2 years ago. They had used old footage to build a ghost. I can't print a maybe against a mountain of digital evidence. Marcus said, the line went dead. A final notification flashed from an internal server, payload delivered. Phase 2 initiated. This wasn't about a severance package, it was a digital coffin. Julian and Sarah weren't just firing me, they were burying me. I pulled the battery from my phone, my pulse steadying into a cold, rhythmic drum beat. They wanted to play with shadows. Fine. I'd show them what happens when the light goes out completely. I didn't call a lawyer. A lawyer follows rules. And the rules were being rewritten to bury me. Instead, I drove to a warehouse in the Strip District, the Deep Archive. It was a graveyard for everything the cloud deemed obsolete. The security guard, whose tenure predated the CEO's, didn't check his tablet. He just nodded. Digital's down, Mrs. Mercer. He grunted, sliding a paper logbook toward me. Old school today. I signed a fake name. My first act of defiance was becoming a ghost in a system that still used ink. The clerk brought out the foundation box's original governance papers from 20 years ago. In the age of instant deletion, nobody bothered to digitize the dust. I dug through the files, my fingers turning gray with soot. You're not on the access list anymore. Rowan, the voice came from the shadows. Arthur. The company's lead counsel for 30 years. Retired, yet always lingering. Call security then. Arthur. I said, tell them I'm looking at the things we swore we'd never scan. He didn't move. He just watched. I found it in box 74. An addendum dated 3 months ago, a leadership contingency clause stripping my voting rights during any ethical investigation. It was the cage they dropped on me in Chapter 1. I traced the signature, expecting Sarah or Julian. My heart froze. The signature was bold, arrogant, and unmistakably his, the CEO. The man who had called me the conscience of the company while quietly forging the knife for my throat. Julian was just the distraction. His father was the architect. He's moving the money, isn't he? I asked the darkness. The discrepancies are his. Arthur didn't answer. He turned and walked away, but left a small yellowed key on the shelf. Copies. Ma'am? The clerk asked. No, I said, tucking the wet ink original into my coat. I want the originals. They can't delete paper. I walked into the biting wind, the weight of the past feeling like armor. They forgot I owned the history they were trying to overwrite. I tried to fight back once. It was a mistake I'll never make again. In a dingy diner, I drafted a surgical LinkedIn post, a timeline of the forged transfers, and a flat denial of embezzlement. I hit publish. The text flickered for 3 seconds before vanishing. In its place, post removed for violating terms of service regarding confidential information. I tried a burner account. My screen froze instantly. IP address flagged for suspicious activity. Access denied. My phone vibrated. No caller ID. You're making it worse, Rowan. Sarah's voice was flat, devoid of the warmth I'd mentored for years. The board is watching your digital footprint in real time. Every character you type is being added to the instability report. Is the truth called instability now? Sarah. It's a breach of your NDA, she replied. Stop trying to be a martyr. They'll take your pension next. Go home, Rowan, if you still have one. The line went dead. Outside, a black SUV sat idling. Its exhaust a white plume in the Pittsburgh air. A predator in plain sight. They weren't hiding, they were marketing their presence. Containment doesn't require handcuffs. It requires the slow removal of options until surrender is the only thing left. A new email arrived on my tablet, compulsory compliance reminder. It was a death warrant for my reputation, painting me as a legacy employee suffering a nervous breakdown. I realized then that direct confrontation was a trap. Every word I spoke was data for them to twist. Every move showed them where my allies hid. I closed the laptop and looked at the SUV. I didn't look angry. I didn't look scared. I just looked away. If they wanted to watch Rowan Mercer, the disgraced executive, I would give them a ghost. While they monitored my instability, they would miss the silent triggers I was about to wake up. I walked out the back exit, through the kitchen, and into the rain. Let them watch the front door. I was done playing a game they owned. I stopped screaming. The silence I cultivated wasn't a white flag, it was a vacuum. I left my company-monitored phone on a park bench and watched from a distance as a man in a gray suit snatched it up 3 minutes later. Let them believe the unstable narrative they'd crafted. Silence does something cruel to people hiding secrets. It makes them noisy. I spent the night in a library basement, logged into an air-gapped terminal. Years ago, I had insisted on Protocol 48. The board called it a Cold War relic. But I'd buried it deep in the server kernel anyway. The rule was simple. If a Tier 1 executive's credentials were revoked without a biometric handover, the system assumed a hostile takeover. It didn't lock the doors. It triggered a compliance echo. I watched the screen as the timer hit 0. Encrypted pings flew out not to Julian or Sarah, but to external auditors, the SEC and insurance underwriters. The message wasn't about my firing. It was governance discrepancy detected. Immediate independent audit required. My laptop chirped with a system log Sarah didn't know existed. Log 0412. Manual override attempted by J. Vance. Log 0413. Override failed. System integrity locked. Log 0415. Emergency board meeting summoned by automated protocol. Julian was panicking. He tried to delete the evidence of his father's money laundering, but the echo had already frozen the records. By firing me so violently, they had pulled the pin on a grenade I'd planted a decade ago. The black SUV was still patrolling my old neighborhood, looking for a broken woman. They were looking for a person. They should have been looking for a process. I closed the terminal. The trap was no longer mine to manage. The system was now the predator. They thought removing me ended the story. They didn't realize I wasn't just a character. I was the ink. And I was starting to run. The CEO's assistant called me at 3 a.m. Her voice was brittle, a glass wall ready to shatter. "Mr. Vance is prepared to make a concession. Rowan," she said, a formal apology. "Julian will be stepping down to pursue other interests. We'll restore your pension. You can walk away with your dignity intact." A controlled burn. He was sacrificing his own son to stop the fire from reaching his office. "Put him on," I said. The line clicked. Silence followed the heavy, expensive silence of a man who owned the city. "It's over, Rowan," Vance said. "You got your pound of flesh. Julian is out. Take the win." "I don't care about Julian," I replied. My voice as cold as the steel of the Monongahela bridges. "Julian is a symptom. You are the disease. Careful," he hissed. "I built this company, and I built the vault where you hide the bodies." I sent a single file to his private terminal. "Check the 2006 merger audits, the ones we lost in the server migration." I didn't lose them. "Arthur, I archived them." The silence on the other end turned suffocating. I could almost hear his heart rate spiking through the fiber optic cables. 20 years ago, he hadn't just moved money. He'd erased a competitor using methods that would put him in a federal cell today. "What do you want?" he finally asked. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw, jagged edge of a trapped animal. "I don't want your son's head on a platter," I said. "And I don't want my old job back. I want you to look at the calendar invite I just sent. An emergency board meeting. 8 o'clock a.m. "I'll block it," he snarled. "You can't. The compliance echo I triggered in Chapter 6 has already notified the SEC. The only way to stop the full disclosure is for you to walk into that room and tell the board that I am the only one who can fix the discrepancies you created." I hung up before he could respond. Power isn't about sitting in the big chair. It's about being the only person who knows how to keep the chair from collapsing. Vance thought he was the hunter. He was about to find out he was just the bait. I didn't knock. The biometric scanner at the boardroom door turned green, not because they'd restored my access, but because the system no longer recognized their authority to keep me out. The room was a portrait of panicked old men. Julian was gone. Sarah sat in the corner, her face a mask of pale terror. Vance sat at the head of the table, staring at a screen that was hemorrhaging red text. "The meeting is closed. Rowan," Vance said, though his voice lacked its usual iron. "The meeting hasn't even begun," I replied, taking the seat at the opposite end. I didn't bring a laptop. I didn't bring a lawyer. I brought a single printed page. "We've seen your echo audit," a senior director snapped. "We'll fight it in court for a decade." "You don't have a decade. You have 90 seconds. I slid the paper across the mahogany. "That is the equity safeguard I wrote into the 2018 partner agreement. It's a poison pill triggered by a total governance failure." The room went silent as they read. Vance's eyes widened. You diverted the voting shares," he whispered. "I didn't divert them," I corrected. "The system did. Because you fired the only person authorized to verify the compliance of the offshore accounts. The bylaws triggered an automatic transfer of 15% of the voting power to a third-party escrow. My escrow. This is theft." Someone shouted. "No," I said, leaning forward. "This is engineering. You tried to erase me, but you forgot that I am the logic gate this entire company passes through. As of 1 minute ago, you don't have a quorum. You can't fire me, you can't sue me, and you certainly can't outvote me." Vance looked at the clock. The 90 seconds were up. The screen behind him turned black, then displayed a single, golden logo Mercer Governance Group. "You're not here for your job," Sarah whispered from the corner. finally understanding. I'm here for the truth, I said. Either we open the books and clean out the rot together, or I let the echo finish what it started and watch this building turn into a parking lot by Friday. I stood up. I didn't wait for a vote. In a room full of masters of the universe, I was the only one who still knew how to keep the lights on. The boardroom emptied like a sinking ship, leaving only me and the man who had tried to drown me. Vance didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a relic. He slid a leather-bound folder across the table. Stay. Rowan. I'll fire the rest of the board. You take the president's chair. We'll announce it at the bell. I didn't even touch the folder. You still don't get it. Arthur. You think the chair's the prize? You think power is a title on a glass door. It's a $20 million salary, he countered, his voice desperate. It's your name on the building. My name was on the building when you tried to erase me, I said, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Pittsburgh skyline. I don't want the target on my back anymore. I've spent 24 years defending your throne. I'm tired of being the shield. Then what was this for? He gestured wildly at the screen still glowing with my governance logo. The audits? The voting shares? You won. What do you want? I want the architecture, I said, turning to face him. I'm keeping my voting block in the escrow. I'm keeping my compliance echo active. You'll stay in that chair. You'll take the heat for the losses. You'll answer to the press. And you'll smile for the shareholders. I leaned over the table, my shadow falling across his face. But every decision you make, every contract you sign, every hire you authorize, it passes through my server first. You get the crown, Arthur. I get the veto. He stared at me, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. I wasn't his replacement. I was his ghost. I was the invisible hand that would move his pen for the rest of his career. You're making me a puppet, he whispered. I'm making you a survivor, I corrected. Sign the settlement. Restore my reputation. Quietly? He signed. His hand shook just enough for me to see. I took my copy of the document and walked toward the door. As I passed Sarah in the lobby, she stood up. Waiting for an order? I didn't give her one. I just kept walking. They thought power was the ability to be seen. I knew the truth. Real power is being the one who chooses what is allowed to stay visible. I walked out of the building not as an executive, but as a legend. My new office doesn't have a view of the skyline. And my name isn't etched in frosted glass. It's a quiet space in an old brick building where the only sound is the rhythmic clatter of the T-train crossing the bridge. A month ago, Sarah came to see me. She didn't bring a subpoena or a threat. She brought a peace offering, a vintage bottle of scotch, and a face lined with exhaustion. It's falling apart. Rowan, she whispered, her eyes avoiding mine. The echo stopped, but the logic is gone. Every time we try to update the infrastructure, the system rejects us. It's like the building is trying to vomit us out. I poured 2 glasses. I didn't tell her that I wasn't sabotaging them. I didn't have to. I had simply stopped being the glue. I built that company to survive a crisis. Sarah, I said, I didn't build it to survive a lack of integrity. You can't fix the code if you don't understand the soul of the machine. She left without asking me to return. She knew the answer. I opened my laptop. On the main monitor, I watched the live feed of the firm's stock. It was stable for now. On the second monitor, I watched the private governance logs. I saw Vance's login attempt at 9:00 p.m., followed by a permission denied flag. He was trying to bypass the veto I'd set in Chapter 9. He failed. They thought they had erased me in that first hour. They thought that by deleting my files and changing my locks, they could delete my influence. They forgot that a building is more than its facade. They forgot that if you remove the foundation, the marble floors don't matter. I am 52 years old. I have no title, no corporate badge, and no seat at the table. And yet, I have never been more powerful. I don't own the company. I own the way it breathes. I closed the laptop and stepped out onto the balcony. The Pittsburgh air cool and smelling of rain. The city lights flickered below a sprawling, complex network of systems. They removed my name from the masthead, but I am written into every line of their history. They can rewrite the story all they want. I am the one who holds the pen. The last thing I felt from my husband was the warmth of his thumb brushing my cheek. Stay close, Evan whispered, his voice vibrating with that effortless CEO charisma. He adjusted his cufflinks, flashing the watch I'd bought him for our 5th anniversary. I can't do this without you. Sophia. I believed him. I always did. I stayed in the wings of the Denver auditorium, a shadow supporting the sun. Outside the curtain, 500 employees and a row of predatory investors waited for the news that would solidify our IPO. This was our Mount Everest moment. Evan stepped into the light. The applause was a physical wall of sound. I watched his silhouette strong, reliable. The man I shared a bed with. He started with the usual rhetoric: integrity, innovation, responsibility. Then, the air in the room died. Growth requires pruning. Evan's voice turned cold, clinical. Transparency is the only way forward. We have discovered a $20 million leak in our operational budget. The giant screen behind him flickered. I froze. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a series of screenshots from my private laptop, internal memos, wire transfer approvals, my digital signature, bold and damning, flashed in high definition. The person responsible for this breach of trust, Evan said, pausing with the precision of a practiced executioner, is my wife and COO, Sophia Hale. The silence that followed was more violent than a scream. I didn't breathe. I watched my life turn into a crime scene in real time. My phone buzzed in my pocket once. Twice the haptic feedback of my credentials being revoked. Access denied. Identity erased. As security approached me not with handcuffs, but with the quiet, firm presence of men removing trash, I looked at Evan. He didn't look back. He was already talking about corrective measures. I realized then this wasn't a mistake. It was a ritual. He didn't need a partner. He needed a body to throw into the gears so the machine could keep turning. I walked out of the auditorium through a gauntlet of pity and disgust. As the heavy doors clicked shut behind me, the applause for his honesty began again. The man I loved had just murdered my reputation to save his stock price. And the worst part, he had used my own hands to sharpen the blade. The lobby of Hale Global didn't smell like betrayal. It smelled like expensive espresso and floor wax. I reached for my badge out of muscle memory. The reader didn't beep. It let out a flat, mechanical rasp. A red light blinked steady, cold, and final. I tried again, my heart hammering against my ribs. Access denied. My phone buzzed in my hand. One by one, the icons for my work apps vanished. My email, my calendar, my encrypted files gone. The screen flickered and died. Evan hadn't just fired me, he had performed a digital lobotomy. Sophia, I turned. Sarah, the receptionist who had sent me flowers on my birthday for 3 years, wouldn't look at me. She was staring at a spot 6 inches above my shoulder. HR is in the small conference room. Sophia, they asked that you don't go upstairs. The small conference room. The one with no windows. The one we used for firing people we didn't want the rest of the office to see. I turned to leave, my pride a jagged shard in my throat. When I saw her, Maya, a junior analyst I'd mentored, was standing by the glass doors, her personal belongings shoved into a pathetic cardboard box. She was trembling. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. She stepped toward me, her voice a frantic whisper. They cut me because I flagged the logs. Sophia, I tried to tell the CFO there were irregularities in the auto approvals. My pulse spiked. What logs? Maya, the vendor payments. She hissed, glancing nervously at the security guard. The rules were modified from your terminal. Last Thursday, at 9 p.m., a cold sweat broke across my neck. Last Thursday at 9 p.m., Evan and I were at Linger, celebrating our anniversary. I hadn't touched my laptop, but Evan had forgotten his phone in the car and borrowed my bag to go grab it. He had been gone for 20 minutes. They used you, Maya whispered, her eyes filling with tears, and they used me to cover the trail. The security guard cleared his throat. Moving toward us, Maya flinched, grabbed her box, and vanished into the Denver morning. I stood alone in the center of the lobby, the building I helped build, humming with a life that no longer recognized me. I wasn't just a wife or an executive anymore. I was a ghost in my own empire. The house was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful quiet of a home. It was the clinical silence of a funeral parlor. Evan was in the kitchen, casually decanting a Bordeaux as if he hadn't just incinerated my soul on a jumbotron. He had already poured 2 glasses, one for him, one for the ghost he expected me to be. "Sit down, Sophia," he said. His voice was terrifyingly steady, the same tone he used to close Series B funding. He didn't offer an apology. He offered a folder. I didn't sit. I opened it standing up. On the left, a divorce decree, cold and surgical. On the right, a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive, it practically forbade me from whispering my own name in my sleep. $5 million, Evan said, swirling his wine. Plus the villa in Tuscany. It's already titled in your maiden name. You leave tomorrow, you disappear, and the board drops the internal investigation. And if I stay and fight, I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I was fighting to harness, then I can't protect you. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide with a faked, watery sincerity. The evidence is already with the auditors. If you stay, you aren't just fired, you're a felon. I'm giving you a life. Sophia, take the money and go. He stepped closer, reaching out to touch my hair. I flinched as if his fingers were red-hot needles. Don't be emotional, he whispered. A classic CEO tactic to dismiss a woman's intuition. Think of the future we talked about. This is just corporate restructuring. For us, I looked at the man I had loved for a decade and realized I was looking at a predator who had mistaken me for prey. He wasn't trying to save us. He was buying my silence because he knew I was the only person smart enough to find where he'd hidden the bodies. I didn't sign. I didn't scream. I simply closed the folder and pushed it back across the marble. You're right, Evan, I said, my voice finally finding its edge. This isn't personal. It's war. I walked out, leaving the wine untouched. Behind me, I heard the glass shatter against the floor. The truth didn't hide in the company's servers. It was buried in the one place Evan called my paranoia. I pulled the encrypted drive from its hiding spot, a hollowed-out book on a shelf he never touched. He used to laugh when he saw me backing up my logs. Sophia, we're a team. He'd say, kissing my temple. Trust the system we built. Now, as the drive hummed to life in my dimly lit home office, I realized the system was a gallows, and he'd been tying the noose for years. I bypassed the surface files and dove into the raw metadata. The smart contracts were a bloodbath of digital forgery. My signature was everywhere authorizing offshore shell companies, bypassing procurement limits, rerouting the Series C funding. I cross-referenced a timestamp, October 14th, 11:34 p.m. I remembered that night. We were at a cabin in Aspen, no cell service, just a fireplace and a bottle of scotch. My laptop was in his bag. I'd fallen asleep in his arms, feeling safe while I slept. My signature had moved $4 million to a Cayman account. Another entry, my birthday, while I was blowing out candles. I was approving a fraudulent vendor contract. It wasn't just a frame-up. It was a masterpiece. He hadn't reacted to a mistake. He had engineered an entire alternate history where I was a greedy, calculating thief. The logic changes went back 24 months incremental, quiet, and perfectly legal on paper. A sudden chill crawled up my spine. The cursor on my screen began to move. I wasn't alone in the file. A chat window popped up on my desktop. No username, just a single line of text that turned my blood to ice. Some ghosts are better left buried. Sophia, go to Tuscany while you still can. My webcam light flickered on a tiny, judgmental green eye. He was watching me. Right now. I slammed the laptop shut and ripped the drive out. My heart wasn't racing. It was hardening into a diamond. He thought he'd built a trap. He forgot that I was the one who wrote the code. Arthur Bell didn't offer me coffee, and he certainly didn't offer me sympathy. His office, overlooking Civic Center Park, smelled of old leather and expensive cynicism. He didn't read the files I gave him. He dissected them with a silver letter opener, his eyes tracking lines of code like a predator scenting blood. "You're not here because you're innocent, Sophia," he said, finally looking up. His eyes were the color of a winter sky. "In this town, innocence is just a lack of evidence. You're here because you want to survive the collision." "I have the logs," I countered, my voice tight. "The timestamps prove I couldn't have signed those transfers." Arthur let out a dry, rattling laugh. "In a courtroom, your logs are just files on a drive you controlled. A jury won't see a frame-up. They'll see a COO who was smart enough to build herself an alibi. If you fight the theft, you'll lose. The signatures are yours. The law doesn't care about your heart, it cares about your encryption key." The room felt suddenly cold. Then what am I supposed to do? Sit back and let him send me to prison? Arthur leaned forward, the shadow of a smile playing on his lips. "You don't fight the crime, Sophia. You hijack the motive. Evan doesn't care about $20 million. He cares about the $4 billion he'll get when Hale Global goes public next month." He tapped the folder. "The SEC hates a mystery. You don't need to prove you're a saint. You just need to make the theft loud enough, messy enough, and unexplainable enough that the IPO becomes radioactive. You aren't a defendant anymore. You're a structural flaw." I saw it then. The shift from defense to leverage. I didn't need to clear my name. I needed to threaten his empire. "He'll come for you," Arthur warned. "Not as a husband, but as a cornered animal. Let him," I said, my voice finally finding its steel. As I hit the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. A calendar invite from Evan's private assistant flashed on the screen. Subject: coffee, 8 a.m. Let's fix this. The predator was starting to realize the trap had a hole in it. Evan sat in the corner booth of the quiet Denver cafe, looking every bit the grieving widower of a corporate tragedy. He had ordered my favorite, a flat white with an extra shot, and placed it on my side of the table. A peace offering from a man who had already declared war. "You look tired, Sophia," he said, his voice dripping with a rehearsed, honeyed concern. I sat down, letting my movements appear heavy. Defeated. "I'm done fighting. Evan, I just want to know how it ends." He leaned back, his posture relaxing as the CEO mask slipped slightly. He thought he had won. "It ends with you in Tuscany, Sophia, rich, beautiful, and silent. It's a good life. I'll sign," I whispered, keeping my eyes on the coffee. "But I need the truth first. Why me? Why not a shell company? Why not a CFO error?" Evan smiled, and for the first time, I saw the vacuum where his heart should have been, because you were the only one with enough integrity to make the lie believable. If I blamed a ghost, the SEC would keep digging. But you're the principled wife who made a tragic mistake. The story is so perfect, no one will ever look for a second chapter. So I was just an architectural necessity, I said, my voice flat. "You were the perfect sacrifice," he corrected gently, as if explaining a business strategy. "I knew you wouldn't make a scene. You hate messes. Sophia, I knew you'd take the quiet exit to protect what we built." I nodded slowly. Every word was being captured by the microscopic lens pinned to my lapel. Evan wasn't just admitting to a frame-up. He was admitting to a premeditated psychological hit. "You really thought you knew me," I said. Standing up, he didn't notice the change in my tone. He was already checking his watch. "The documents will be at Arthur's office by noon. Don't be late." I walked out into the crisp Colorado air, the recording burning a hole in my pocket. Evan thought he had traded his wife for a $4 billion IPO. He had no idea he had just handed me the detonator. I didn't leak the recording to the tabloids. That would be messy. And as Evan so pointedly noted, I hate a mess. Instead, I sent it to the only people who feared the truth more than he did the lead underwriters of the IPO. Then, I opened my laptop and went to work. Deep within the core of Hale Global's operating system sat a dormant failsafe I'd nicknamed the Oversight Ghost. It was a high-level governance protocol I'd written years ago to freeze all assets in the event of a catastrophic audit failure. Evan had forgotten it existed. He always viewed code as a tool for profit. I viewed it as a tether for morality. I entered the 64-character override key. My heart didn't race. My fingers didn't tremble. I was simply executing a command. Execute global compliance freeze. With one keystroke, the empire went dark, across Denver. In the high-rise offices of Hale Global, every smart contract stalled. Every automated wire transfer hit a digital wall. The system was now in read-only mode. It wouldn't allow Evan or his sister, the CFO, to move a single cent or delete a single log until an independent third-party audit was completed. My phone disintegrated into a frenzy of notifications. The first call was from Claire, Evan's sister. She didn't lead with hello. She led with a scream. Sophia, what have you done? The system is locked. We have a $40 million margin call in 10 minutes. The protocol is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Claire, I said, my voice as cool as the mountain air. It's protecting the investors from internal operational failures. Isn't that what Evan told the world I was? Undo it now. I can't. I lied. Though it was a beautiful lie. The encryption is decentralized. Only a full forensic audit can unlock the vault now. I hung up. I didn't need to do anything else. The system I built was now a witness. And for the first time in 2 years, it was telling the truth without Evan's permission. The morning was supposed to belong to the opening bell. Instead, it belonged to the sirens. I stood across the street from Hale Global, a paper cup of coffee in my hand, watching the choreography of a collapse. Black SUVs swarmed the curb like sharks scenting a wound. Men in windbreakers marked FBI and SEC moved through the glass revolving doors. Inside, the celebration banners were still hanging. Mocking the panic below, I saw Evan through the lobby window. He was trying to use his CEO voice handout. Chest puffed until a federal agent spun him around. The click of the handcuffs was invisible from here, but I felt it in my marrow. He looked around wildly, his eyes searching the crowd. He wasn't looking for a lawyer. He was looking for the wife who was supposed to be his shield. I didn't stay to watch him be loaded into the car. I had an appointment in the parking garage. I found Claire, the CFO, near the service exit. She was frantic. Throwing a designer suitcase into the back of her Porsche, the oversight ghost protocol had locked her out of the offshore accounts, and she looked like a woman who had realized her parachute was just a backpack full of rocks. Going somewhere. Claire, I asked, stepping out from behind a concrete pillar. She jumped, her face pale and glistening with sweat. Sophia, get out of my way. I can fix this. I can tell them it was all Evan. Just let me pass. You spent 2 years helping him bury my name, I said, my voice steady as a heartbeat. You didn't just watch. You held the shovel. I'll give you half, she hissed, reaching for the car door. 10 million. Just move. I don't want your money. Claire, I want the logs. I pointed to the encrypted drive she was clutching. And so do the agents waiting at the end of the ramp. Her eyes went wide. She looked toward the exit just as the blue and red lights began to strobe against the garage walls. She collapsed against the car, the drive sliding from her fingers. The empire hadn't just fallen. It had been dismantled by the very hands that built its foundation. I walked away before they reached her, the sound of her crying echoing in the hollow concrete. The boardroom was a tomb of expensive mahogany and desperate men. The air was heavy with the scent of cold coffee and failure. Only half the chairs were occupied. The rest of the seats belonged to executives who were currently being questioned in separate rooms. As I walked in, the remaining directors straightened, their eyes tracking me with a mixture of reverence and terror. Sophia, the chairman began, his voice trembling with a forced, practiced warmth. Thank God you're here. The markets are in free fall. The lead underwriters are threatening to pull the plug entirely. I didn't sit. I stood at the head of the table Evan's seat and looked at them. These were the same people who had avoided my gaze a week ago when security escorted me out. We've had an emergency vote. A woman from the audit committee spoke up, sliding a leather-bound folder toward me. We want to appoint you interim CEO, effective immediately. full autonomy, a massive retention bonus. We'll even let you write the press release detailing your heroic return to fix Evan's mess. I looked at the contract. It was a gilded cage. They didn't want a leader, they wanted a mascot. They wanted my reputation to act as a bandage for their hemorrhaging stock price. You sat in this room while Evan blamed me for a $20 million oversight. I said, my voice echoing in the hollow room. You saw the logs I sent. You saw the truth. And yet, you waited until the FBI arrived to call me. We were following protocol. Sophia, the chairman stammered. Now, we're offering you the crown. I don't want a crown made of thorns, I replied, pushing the folder back. You're not asking me to lead. You're asking me to be the face of a lie so you can keep your bonuses. I'm not your savior, and I'm certainly not your sacrifice. If you walk out, someone hissed, this company dies. Then let it, I said, turning toward the door. Some things are too broken to be fixed. They need to be replaced. I walked out, leaving the most powerful people in Denver staring at an empty chair. For the first time in years, I didn't care about the stock price. I only cared about the air in my lungs. The divorce was finalized in a room that smelled of dust and old ink. Evan wasn't there. He was wearing a different kind of suit now, one provided by the state. His lawyer sat across from me, his eyes fixed on the floor, handing over the final documents like they were radioactive. I signed my name for the last time as Sophia Hale, with a single stroke of a pen. The legal tether snapped. The $5 million, the villa, the hush money. I'd rejected it all in favor of a smaller, cleaner settlement from the liquidation of my own shares. I didn't want his blood money. I wanted my soul back. I walked out into the Denver morning. The air was bitingly cold, the kind of cold that makes you feel alive. I stood in front of the glass tower that used to house our dreams. The Hale Global sign was being dismantled, the letters swinging precariously from a crane. It was a hollow shell, just like the man who built it. I pulled a photo from my pocket, the one from our wedding in Vail. We looked so happy, so invincible. I didn't feel anger looking at it. I felt a strange, distant pity for the woman in that dress who didn't know she was marrying her own executioner. I tore the photo into a dozen pieces and let the wind carry them toward the mountains. My phone buzzed. A news alert: Evan Hale sentenced to 12 years. I swiped it away. His life was a closed book. Mine was a blank page. I learned that freedom isn't the absence of struggle. It's the refusal to be the sacrifice in someone else's story. If a system requires a victim to survive, it deserves to burn. And if a man asks you to disappear so he can shine, he's not a partner, he's a shadow. I am Sophia again. Just Sophia. I am difficult, dangerous, and principled. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel the need to apologize for any of it.